Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm very pleased to be here with you today to discuss this topic of great importance. Technology is playing an important part in improving the livelihoods of many across the globe, and it is time to leverage it through artificial intelligence, Earth observation data, and other technologies to climate-proof global health. Technology is an invaluable resource which we must optimize in order to identify innovative means to tackle the climate crisis. To achieve this, it is essential that private and public sectors work together to bring forward technological advancements, enabling us to harness the power of innovation to transform global health outcomes and secure the future of our planet and its people. Emergencies such as wars, droughts, and floods commonly mobilize donors to promptly mitigate the associated issues such as long-term food shortages, rampant malnutrition, disease, and other human crises, and rightfully so. As human beings, we are called to act on such tragedies that affect the very fabric of humanity. However, the images of entire forests being felled, bees disappearing, and the loss of underwater flora and fauna do not necessarily invoke the same emotional or financial response. We must therefore understand the underlying connectivity that environmental degradation has on all of these issues, our social fabric, and indeed our very future. We must recognize that we are highly dependent on our local environment and habitat, often much more than we may have initially comprehended or appreciated. You may be shocked today to learn that we are already experiencing the resurgence of diseases once thought to be eradicated, and that now new serious health risks are emerging as a result of our worsening climate. According to the World Health Organization, for example, between 2030 and 2050, climate change is expected to cause approximately 250,000 additional deaths per year due to heat exposure in elderly population, diarrhea, malaria, and chronic childhood undernutrition. Additionally, as we have learned from COVID-19, the risks of zoonotic diseases are rising, particularly with continued deforestation. Deforestation needs to be curtailed rapidly to stabilize the global climate. The cutting and burning of forests account for roughly 10% of global carbon emissions annually, or 8 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year. This is the equivalent of the output of 4 billion cars being removed from the road every year. Not only do we need to stop deforestation, but we also need mass reforestation to draw carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Valuable plant species are being lost around the world daily. Many of these plants might represent the cures for the illnesses and diseases that threaten us, both now and in the future as we live closer and closer together in huge urban centers. At this time, only 1% of all tropical plants have been tested for their medicinal properties. A quarter of the medicines that we use right now are derived from the rainforest, which includes 70% of cancer drugs. With forests burning because of climate change, with forest lands being converted to agricultural land, predominantly for rearing livestock, we are losing invaluable biodiversity and perhaps cures for diseases that we have not encountered yet. I recently set up and lead the UAE's independent climate change accelerators, a non-partisan climate action think tank that will bring together members of the public and private sector to accelerate the green economy and drive commitments towards net zero. We are motivated by the fact that philanthropic opportunities arise particularly through access to unencumbered funds, as we have seen displayed during times of natural disasters. There are multiple ways to attract capital, both backing high-risk ventures or de-risking them. We need not look too far to see examples of this. His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, President of the UAE, continues to work alongside Bill Gates to eradicate diseases through various initiatives, including Reaching the Last Mile Fund. His Highness Sheikh Mohammed has set a high bar for all of us with his personal commitment to tackling diseases and the multiple ripples of climate change. He has shown us that by working together with local and global partners with clear targets, we can achieve success. I encourage all of you to play your part and join the conversation around climate change. While here at COP27, the most important climate-focused conference in the world, I implore my peers in the sustainability community to encourage international leaders to place global health and climate action at the top of their agendas. At the heart of tackling climate change is an important word: collaboration. The mammoth task we have before us cannot be done in silos that don't communicate or collaborate together. The only way forward for us to do this is by enabling and energizing an ecosystem that actively participates in realizing one shared vision. And the UAE's independent climate change accelerators will become the nucleus that will bring this ecosystem to life, providing evidence-based advice and strategic recommendations to stakeholders on positive climate action that facilitates the transition to a green economy. We need to leverage innovation with technology and engage with the private sector. We need to prioritize Global South to those countries that are experiencing the damaging effects of climate change now. By providing early-stage funding for emerging climate solutions and their commercialization, philanthropists can help find solutions to solve issues resulting from climate change, thus enabling these solutions to become affordable and readily accessible. Eventually, these solutions can become more economical than less climate-friendly options, as we have seen with solar and wind power. We all can do our part to become more sustainable. The actions we take today as a collective will determine our future. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Highness, for those inspirational remarks. Some somber observations, surely, but some cause for optimism as well, and a nice call to action to all of us that we can act on for prioritization and partnerships, which indeed will be essential as we face the challenges ahead. My name is Kelly Willis. I'm the managing director of Malaria No More. It's a 15-year-old organization with a vision of a world where no one dies from a mosquito bite. Thanks to all of you for being here, on taking the time out of your day and finding us amongst a wealth of other insightful, inspirational sources of information throughout COP27. Of course, we are all here for the same reason, to act professionally, personally, and with passion in response to what has been accurately referred to as the existential crisis of climate change. And we do mean existential as in threatening the very existence of humankind. It's really terribly challenging and terrible to envision that doomsday worst case scenario, a planet Earth that's uninhabitable to humankind. But it is alarmingly easier all the time to envision the steps that we will take, that we're likely to take on our path to that dystopia, because we're living it. For some of us, that means just watching the frequency and severity of extreme weather events, whether that's on television with the rest of the world or because we've lived through them personally or loved ones have. For some of us, rising sea levels are threatening to displace our entire community or nation. So, we are increasingly seeing those realities. We're also increasingly aware of the direct impact that climate change is likely to have on human health. As the evidence grows, we're more aware that rising temperatures aren't just uncomfortable, but they cause cardiac disease in millions of people around the world. Air pollution isn't just an inconvenience, but it creates lung disease and asthma in otherwise healthy populations. We're starting to understand the mental health challenges that are brought about by climate change. Increasingly, we will see food and water-borne illnesses become more common and more harmful. And infectious diseases will grow and change and become less predictable, something that at Malaria No More we're particularly focused on. None of us will experience all of those harmful effects of climate change on our own health, but few of us are likely to avoid all of them. And as is often the case in this world with terrible health inequities and disparity, those least likely to escape the impact of climate change on human health are those who are already shouldering a disproportionate share of the disease burden around the world, and incidentally did as little as anyone to bring them about. We know all of this because the evidence is mounting as research increases. Not as quickly as we would like, but we're getting there. We're moving in the right direction. Unfortunately, we have passed the point at which this growing evidence base can and should be used uniquely for the purpose of bolstering our case for global action. We can and should continue to use it for that purpose. One more reason why we should demand immediate, decisive action to reduce our carbon emissions and change this course that we're on, this terrible course we're on. But now, this evidence is needed to inform proactive, practical global health solutions in the context of climate change. We need to climate-proof our global health systems and our disease elimination systems. Fortunately, there is a groundswell of new innovation in this category that we're starting to see. Highly sophisticated technologies that help predict where, when, and to what extent disease outbreaks will occur so that we can act in advance and prevent those outbreaks. These tools, by the way, have an added benefit of creating new cost effectiveness. These very sophisticated prediction tools allow us to program with precision and direct scarce resources when and where they're needed. And that value would be enormous even in the absence of the impact that climate change is having. So I lead a consortium of leading health and technology organizations called Forecasting Healthy Futures, and we're really setting out to do exactly that. Bring attention to the opportunities that technology provides to get ahead of this problem and to climate-proof global health solutions. Let me finally introduce my panelists on stage, who are all members of the Forecasting Healthy Futures consortium. So Tala Al-Ramahi is the director of the Reaching the Last Mile, which, as we heard from Her Highness, is a portfolio of global health programs supported by Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. And Kaushik Sarkar is the director of the Institute for Malaria and Climate Solutions, a virtual institute, but operating out of India. Professor Tatiana Loboda is a professor of geographic studies at the University of Maryland. And Dr. Hasni Gadira is the Director of Research Engagement at the Mohammed bin Zayed University for Artificial Intelligence. So we'll begin a conversation now, and make sure to save time for questions from all of you, if you have them. Kaushik, I wanted to start with you, because you're on the ground living in a country that's still challenged by malaria. India has set a goal for malaria elimination by 2030, but we're not there yet. Tell us how you're already experiencing, if you are, the impacts of climate change on malaria patterns or elsewhere in the health system in India.
So, thank you for that question, Kelly. And paradoxically, I come from a city that is one of the worst state of air pollution. I come from Delhi. And I work in a city which is one of the worst state in malaria. So Kelly was talking about the state of Odisha. 3%, only 3% of India's population live in Odisha. And it shares over 40% of malaria burden of India. When we started working, 41% of the malaria burden of India was shared by the people of Odisha, and that too, not the entire part of Odisha, but only 5 to 7 districts out of the 30 districts. Now, that's the injustice and the problem that climate attributes and the related attributes bring due to their effect not only on the disease transmission, but also how services are delivered, how accessibility is determined at the last mile. So, first of all, I think it's well known for everyone that malaria gets transmitted by bites of infected mosquitoes. So it's simple. You kill mosquitoes, you treat human, you can control and eliminate the disease. But then, as epidemiologists, when we are trying to combat any disease, we try to find a single pattern out there. The more generalizable the pattern is, it is easier to combat that disease. So if you have only one type of pattern globally, or even in a country, it's easy to combat that disease. For malaria in Odisha, I don't have the counts of the number of patterns that we see, and that is driven by the problems of climate change. We have hilly areas and forest areas, all having different climates, seasonal malaria, year-long malaria, and then those areas which were not malarious previously are becoming malarious because of global warming. So your at-risk people are increasing, deforestation also exposing more number of pupils to malaria, and at the same time, urbanization is exposing you to different forms of risk. Plus, extreme weather events that disrupt the services, and that increases the risk of malaria. The coastal part of Odisha, they don't have malaria, but because of cyclonic storms every year, they are getting exposed to malaria risk every year. And at the same time, if you think from the perspective of the last mile frontline workers, you will find that those frontline workers are actually working in areas which are flood prone, which are inaccessible. They are female workers and they cannot reach to the last mile.
So Kaushik, you've described a growing malaria zone, changing seasonality, and disruption from extreme weather events. Tell us about how you're working to combat that volatility.
So, as Kelly has already talked about the Forecasting Healthy Futures initiative, which is supported by the Reaching the Last Mile Forum, the fund. And under that initiative, we have developed the malaria prediction and planning tool. It's a tool that converts research and epidemiological information, which is highly technical information, and climate information into operational insights. The insights that is needed by the program managers on ground to tackle the problems for efficient supply chain, for better service delivery, for improved surveillance and data collection, and also to monitor the work and at the last mile. Plus, as Kelly mentioned earlier, the early warning system, we are implementing a highly sophisticated model of early warning system using weather data and health data, which is helping to forecast malaria and enabling better stock prediction, better service preparation, and frontline worker preparation at the last mile.
Fantastic. So two of our Forecasting Healthy Futures Consortium members who aren't with us today are IBM and its weather company, who has provided some of the essential data, weather data we're using to build this model, and Tableau, which creates data visualization technologies that really translate that sophisticated information into actionable decision support tools for folks on the ground working in the healthcare system. But weather, I think, is not probably the only kind of Earth observation data set that we can use. Tatiana, I want to turn to you to talk about your work beyond climate and other sources of data that will also help us with this predictive capacity.
Thank you, Kelly. Weather, as you can imagine, is a very important part. But environment is not just weather. It's a combination of the weather patterns and what we humans are doing to the surrounding landscape. And that combination creates such a complex system that changes that people implement to the land covers and land use can mitigate against climate change, or they can amplify climate change. And that same component goes to the disease. As you can imagine, the same exact land cover modification, for example, let's take deforestation, can in some cases mitigate against malaria because it actually eliminates mosquito habitat if your primary mosquito is a forest-dwelling mosquito. Or in a very different situation, it can bring more people with different malarial load in their bloodstream already, such as logging migrants, people who are associated with that work, into the area that previously didn't have malaria and result in a malaria outbreak. That's why it's so frequently so hard to say that a particular direction of climate change results in a particular outcome, because there's so much that surrounds it and that influences the ultimate outcome, right? What we do have now is the Earth-observing satellite systems that give us so much information about how land surface is changing, what people are doing on land surface, and we can infer both the mosquito habitat availability and the changes to the environment, as well as to changes to human patterns, what people are doing on the land. Are they farming? Are they logging forests? And that determines their vulnerability and their exposure to different kind of diseases, right? The amount of data that we have from satellite observing systems is just incredible, right? And what we have is a complete global coverage from some systems every 3 days, from other systems twice daily. It can be more than that. And this deluge of data really is a phenomenal resource, but it also brings challenges in terms of how do we take advantage of all this information that is coming in our way.
That is fascinating. I don't think that the average person has enough appreciation for how much detail and data we can get from that Earth observation satellites. Fascinating. And multiple layers of variables that with very different relationships to one another, creating these very complex causality and correlations. That sounds like a staggering amount of information to process. Dr. Hosni, I'm hoping you can tell us the role that artificial intelligence and other technologies play in making sense of all of those data.
Thank you, Kelly. So as Tatiana mentioned, now we have access to tremendous amount of satellite data from ground measurement as well that can contribute to detect and to assess some parameter that directly related to those kind of diseases that we want to capture. And when we talk about satellite data, it's now we have satellite that you can get data on daily basis. There are geoaccessory that you can get it each 15 minutes. And there are some spectral resolution that you can get terabyte of data in hours. So how you can process this data in timely manner and provide end users with some tool they can use to take like decision and action and to prevent any expand. And this is to go back to your question about the linkage between the climate and then the satellite data, how can be used. So for the climate part, it has the long-term component. There are trends that can be detected and they can be used to take action in advance. And there are also the need to have the real-time information that require advanced techniques using artificial intelligence to process all those terabyte of data in near real time and provide end users with information that can be used to make wise decision about action. There are many activity that has been done in this field to link some parameter that can observe from space. Mosquitoes definitely cannot see them from space, but there are some other physical parameter that can be observed and linked to any phenomenon can trigger like anomalies and more activities, like water accumulation, especially when we're dealing with area with malaria under forest condition that require more advanced techniques to process and to derive information that is relevant to decision makers. Also in terms of data is when we talk about the climate modeling and when we run atmospheric models that require a huge volume of computing power to make quick decision, to be able to forecast precipitation, water accumulation, wind speed that is somehow correlated with outbreaks of mosquitoes as well as malaria. So all this information with adding the expertise of machine learning, big data processing, definitely working closely with expert in the field can contribute to improve the outcome on this.
Thank you. Maybe one day the satellite imagery will be high enough resolution to spot the individual mosquitoes. I almost hope not. That's a scary prospect. But still, you're describing just, again, a staggering amount of different data sources and multiple terabytes of data that require processing. And it's great to hear that universities like yours are focused on those issues and that cloud computing can hopefully make it accessible to countries in the global south. But still, it sounds like a major investment. Tal, I want to turn to you. Reaching the last mile, of course, is the most important source of financial support for forecasting healthy futures, but you do so much more than that. Can you talk a little bit about the investment and why it's important?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Kelly. And first off, I wanted to acknowledge Her Highness Sheikha Shamma and her catalytic role in elevating the climate conversation and spearheading solutions that integrate the private sector into this. And I think it's a really important conversation that we're having where we have private sector companies such as IBM and Tableau who are leading the way on creating solutions and platforms for us to be ahead of the curve when it comes to climate change. On Reaching the Last Mile, for those who are not aware of Reaching the Last Mile represents a portfolio of global health programs directly funded by His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, President of the UAE, through his own philanthropic funding. And Reaching the Last Mile is meant to address disease elimination globally, but particularly on diseases that are within the last mile of elimination. So this includes diseases such as polio, but also infectious diseases such as malaria and neglected tropical diseases. the challenge that we now have, and why we have a platform such as Forecasting Healthy Futures that His Highness funds, is that climate change is risking undoing decades of progress on disease elimination. And that creates a momentum for us to be ahead of the curve in creating solutions to climate-proof global health systems and global health programs that address disease elimination, which is why we think leveraging private sector partners who are spearheading innovation in this field, but also bringing in UAE institutions that can play a catalytic and strategic role, such as the Mohammed bin Zayed University for Artificial Intelligence, is incredibly important. And as the UAE, it has a strong presence here at COP27 and taking the baton for COP28 next year and hosting COP and creating a pathway for a net zero world, and hopefully creating more climate-based solutions. We believe at Reaching the Last Mile that staying ahead of the curve and climate-proofing our global health systems is critical to the work that we're doing on disease elimination.
Thank you for the leadership on that front, so important, and thank you for touching again on the importance of public-private integration and partnerships, not just the donor states and private sector foundations, but obviously the technology sector, which is driving so much of the innovation. And great to hear that you're leveraging that investment to impact more than just malaria. Of course, malaria still kills 600,000 people every year. So, and many, many more are at risk of becoming vulnerable given the impacts of climate change. But it's not the only climate-sensitive infectious disease by any means. So it's great to hear that you're addressing other neglected tropical disease. I'd like to hear from others how we think these technologies are applicable to other diseases other than malaria. Hasni, will you start? Is artificial intelligence work, can it work for other mosquito-borne disease or even other vector-borne disease?
Definitely combining artificial intelligence with Earth observation data, that as I mentioned earlier, the larger volume of data require a huge computing and also advanced algorithm to detect some pattern that cannot be easily detected using conventional techniques. And this require a set of skills in machine learning, in some cases in computer vision when you are using multiple satellite data in this. You mentioned about diseases. Definitely, we had a discussion earlier about some work that was done in the UAE in improving detection of the trigger of asthma when you have a dusty condition. And I had discussions with my colleague about air pollution in India, how those can be also used, and how AI combined with other atmospheric model can improve to detect some pattern that can help to reduce the impact of such phenomenon on the outbreak of some of those diseases. There are two levels of interaction. Definitely, AI expert, they need data, and they need a clear physical description of the problem and the causality of the problem, and then with the data that can be later on deriving some pattern that cannot be easily detected using other techniques. So the role of technology in terms of computing, to be able to handle in timely manner a large volume of data and to provide quick response to any decision maker. And then the modeling part where you can use advanced machine learning techniques, data mining techniques to improve detection of some phenomena as well. So this is how we see the role of AI as technology in helping those kind of activities.
Fantastic. So broad applications for the technologies, but also another illustration of the need for close partnerships. You need to understand the dynamics and patterns of the disease and the risks to be looking for. So fantastic. Tatiana, can you give us another example also of a non-malaria, non-asthma, maybe another example, just so folks can really get their arms around what we can do with this technology?
So thank you, Kelly. The portfolio of health-related applications from satellite data is really vast. It's really vast. So vector-borne diseases led themselves very easily, and that goes beyond just malaria. if you think about other vector-borne diseases, even if in the global north, for example, something that we struggle with is tick-borne diseases. It's another insect that transmits a lot of very, very painful, debilitating diseases, frequently lethal. They also can be used through environmental monitoring to detect the outbreaks in tick infestations and subsequently outbreaks in disease. Another thing you can do is, and I know there are actually applications available monitoring mercury poisoning associated with mining activities, where mercury is used and released into the ponds where the mines are operating, and then there is fairly substantial poisoning across the population in general. Another research study that I'm working on is looking at the impact of wildfires and the pollutions that they emit, again in the global north, because the fires there are just spectacular. And the amount of smoke that they release is so large, and it travels so far. It travels across continents, right? It's not just within one area to another. It's from Siberia to Alaska and the other way around. And that smoke pollution caused the wide range of outcomes, from preterm birth and low birth weight in infants to cardiovascular disease, heart disease, lung disease, you name it. And a lot of researchers are bringing satellite information into helping them tackle the environmental components that come into the disease, and understanding and mapping where the disease is happening and where it's likely to happen in the future.
Great. So all kinds of research being conducted, all kinds of application for these technologies. I want to underscore something I said earlier, that all of this predictive information is useful in building a case for action, certainly, but it's also useful for the rational allocation of scarce resources. So we think about, as new technologies such as vaccines and new therapeutics come online, understanding where they're needed to be deployed soonest will be hugely valuable for us in keeping the aggregate resource requirements to a minimum. I want to finally, Kaushik, ask you how all of this technology is playing out. Of course, we have the malaria and prediction planning tool that you're working on, but what about in other countries that you know of? Do countries have what they need to realize the full potential of these technologies? And if not, what's missing and what are the main challenges?
See, Her Highness was talking about collaboration, and that's the biggest challenge in this sector. Everything is siloed. The departments don't speak with each other, the disciplines don't speak with each other. You need multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary, multi-level collaboration, and in all of those collaborations, to ensure climate justice, you need Global South on the table. Multidisciplinary, an example is, we have recently convened an expert network in the Institute for Malaria and Climate Solutions, where we have more than 24 of disciplines just for early warning systems. So you can imagine, for the entire set of climate-sensitive infection, what sort of multidisciplinary collaboration is needed. And multi-sectoral, Kelly was talking about the Weather Company and Tableau Foundation's contribution. Tala talked about the government's contribution. You heard the political will that UAE brought for this particular initiative. So government, private, the third sector organizations, the non-profit, and the hardcore private sector where the business and the commerce lies, they have to come together and work together. Lastly, multi-level policy, program, research. There is a huge language and epistemic gap. They also need to be on the same table, understanding the challenge. And as I mentioned earlier, I repeat, Global South need to be on the table in each of those scenarios, because they are the hardest hit and they need to be the planner of their solutions through local capacity building.
So countries need political commitment, multidisciplinary engagement, and then all the usual things that we struggle with in resource-limited settings, right, in terms of resources. But some of these technologies are circumventing a lot of those requirements. For very sophisticated data literacy or computing power, for example. So those are encouraging things to hear. I think we have time for one question, if there is one from the audience. I see a question way back there. Do we need a microphone?
I would like to thank you for this really, really straightforward discussion about malaria. And this is not in one country, worldwide problem. So I would like to think opposite way around, because malaria is transported all over the world. Not so climate change when affect in one country, like in agriculture, water, the problem stay in the country. But malaria all over the world. So this is give us things about non-limiting helping each other. So for that, I think we should take succeeded case study in one country for malaria to transport it to each other. And this is tropical parasites make problem all over. So this is mean you can't just help your country. We should distributing help over the world. I would like to thank Emirat. I am associated professor in Al-Azhar University, the famous Islamic university in the world. And for that, we'd like to thank also Hero. And if you agree with me, we can clap for him. Someone who inspire our education, our humanity. And he called it in our country Al-Khair. He called Zayed Al-Khair. Could you please clap with me for Zayed Al-Khair?
Who is that?
So thank you very much for my questions.
Thank you so much for the observations. I think coming out of, hopefully, the COVID-19 pandemic, we all have a new appreciation for the global nature of all infectious disease and really of global health in general. And so I do like to think we're all in it together, although I do think that technologies like these are particularly encouraging in their ability to reach those less fortunate, those farthest from opportunity, and with the limited resources to work with. And I think that's what Forecasting Healthy Futures is really committed to doing. I want to take the opportunity to thank the panelists, and in particular, Tala, for her real guidance and strategic vision and the financial support that we receive for the Forecasting Healthy Futures initiative. Thank you to everyone.